And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CISL 650.
Money!
Well, hello and welcome to Boomer Life here on CISL 650. And judging by that Pink Floyd intro, obviously this program has a lot to do with money, specifically personal debt issues. We're talking with Brett Luckin from Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy and proposal administrators in Vancouver. Brett, good to see you again. Welcome back to Boomer Life.
Thank you very much, Stirling. Appreciate that.
Well, it's good to have you back with us. I think one of the things that we need to inform people about right at the beginning of a program like this, when we're talking about personal debt issues, Brett, is the fact that even though it may feel like the entire world is about to close in on you and you're going to disappear into a black hole, there is hope. There are solutions. There are ways that one can extricate oneself from seemingly impossible debt situations.
Yes, in fact, there are a number of solutions available, and probably the worst thing you can do is just to sit and do nothing.
Right.
And not find out what those solutions potentially could do to help you out of your financial situation.
Right. Now, how long have you been with Abakhan and Associates here in British Columbia? You from the South African accent kind of guy.
I've been there since 2009, so what would that work out to? That would be
5 years?
5 years, that's right.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And I've been involved in, I would say, in fact, truthfully, I've been involved in hundreds of different kinds of personal insolvencies and 50 or 60 different corporate type insolvencies, whether it's a bankruptcy or a receivership or a proposal or whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah, so I would like to think I have a fair amount of experience and understanding of how the process works.
And a trustee firm like Abakhan and Associates with offices all over British Columbia, Brett, do you see, is the bulk of the work corporate or personal financial issues?
More lately, it's become very personal. I wouldn't say that there's an uptick. The irony, of course, is that insolvencies generally around Canada are relatively static at about 120,000 per year. Mm-hmm. And in BC, it's relatively static at around 12,000 plus or minus. But I think it's less the numbers and more the reasons why or the nature of how the insolvencies come about is what we've seen. That's what tends to change. Over time, you tend to see that people more recently are going bankrupt or filing proposals who perhaps would never have considered they were even in a situation where they needed to do that even a year, 2 or 3 years ago.
So now, the very first thing you said in the program is that a lot of people wait too long.
Yes, they do.
You discover yourself in a real financial pickle. The hounds are at the door. You're getting letters. You're getting threatening and intimidating and harassing phone calls. Life is getting beyond uncomfortable. It's approaching unbearable. And yet, for some reason, a lot of us just sort of freeze in our tracks and put up with that malarkey.
Yeah, what I do tend to see a lot is people who come into our office who have already liquidated virtually all, if not all, of their RRSPs.
Right.
They've often raided whatever equity they have in their home in one way, shape, or form. They've maxed out credit cards and potentially even got more credit cards than they even themselves knew they could probably ever afford to pay back, and then maxed those cards out as well. So when they come into our office, they really have waited too long. The challenges, the cash flow shortages, the kind of issues that were problems in their lives will often go back, and you can trace it back years, not 1, 2, but maybe sometimes even longer ago than that, 4, 5, 6 years. And what they've done is they've just perpetuated the cycle, emptied their equity, emptied their income, put themselves in a position where they can no longer actually repay their debt. And that's the worst thing to do, really. You should have come to see someone like me or some other kind of financial professional years before and educated yourself on the options that were available to you.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
But since we're pretty stubborn about that stuff. We're kind of stubbornly proud about money and still quite financially illiterate as a nation. How do you square that circle? Because we're kind of stubborn.
Yeah.
We don't like to talk about it, and we don't know half as much as we like to brag we do.
I'm quite passionate about the fact that I think that there is insufficient education given. I would even go as far back as grassroots level at schools. There's insufficient education given to people so that they can understand what credit is, what debt is, and how to manage it.
Right.
And the inevitable happens. You got people who can tell you the capital cities of any major countries in the world, but have no idea how a checkbook functions and what the difference is between a secured credit card or an ordinary credit card, right? It's bizarre. It really is. And I think at some level there needs to be some kind of formal education in this regard, because we have a culture of credit and debt, but we don't have a culture of educating people.
Well, isn't it interesting that some of those school people that you were just talking about, they advance through elementary and secondary school, and then they head out on the road of life to college or university. And the first thing that happens to them once they've been accepted to a college or a university is they start getting letters from credit companies offering them visas and MasterCards. They're 18 or 19. They've never had a real job in their whole lives, and suddenly they can't get credit fast enough. Here, have one of our cards.
My understanding actually is that even some of these universities where you're registering, some of the major banks even are handing out credit cards to brand new students.
Right.
Just literally with moderate, I don't know, a couple of $1,000s worth of credit, and starting that pattern of behavior very, very early in the process.
So is that ultimately it, Brett? Where do most of us, you said about 120,000 Canadians are going to go bankrupt this year. It's a disturbing number.
Yeah.
Here in our own province, you predict with great ease,
12,000.
at least 12,000 of us British Columbians are likely to literally disappear underwater, go bankrupt this year. So with all of these predictable numbers, I would assume the reasons are probably equally predictable. What is the main cause of personal bankruptcy in Canada?
There are precipitating factors, but almost all of them, and I should just clarify and go back and say it's not just bankruptcies, it's bankruptcies and proposals.
Sure,
so
of course.
It's an insolvency process.
Right.
12,000.
So I should say insolvent before saying bankrupt, because we're talking about the remedies, of which there are two. There's the bankruptcy option, but there's also a consumer proposal option.
Correct.
So we'll talk about both of those possibilities, but what gets us into trouble in the first place?
There are many precipitating factors. There's obvious things such as marital breakdown, where people suddenly are looking after two households because they've separated, and their income just simply doesn't support the ability to do that. There's the obvious. There's some kind of what can I call it? It's the black swan event, a major car accident, a medical issue, something that's completely unexpected. You see those happen a lot. Losing of a job, obviously losing of employment is a big factor.
Absolutely.
But even these precipitating factors in many cases could have been dealt with when it's the underlying cause, and the underlying cause most of the time is just simply financial mismanagement, is not preparing for the possibility of losing your job, or some kind of medical issue, or even if you have marital separation, have you been able to sit down and plan so there is an understanding between you and your partner about what you would do, proper planning for those sorts of issues.
Okay. Now, I get all of that about the planning and stuff, but here we are in British Columbia living in the most expensive corner of Canada. I'm talking Metro Vancouver. Your work takes you all over our province.
I do, yeah.
But you live down here in Metro Vancouver.
Yeah.
You know how bloody expensive it is down here.
Unbelievably.
So there's problem number one. Anyone who wants to live in Vancouver, and I mean rent, let alone own in Vancouver, is paying top dollar. So, okay, that's one complication. And the fact that in many cases, I think you were talking about planning. What we hear from the people who do the payroll stuff back east, that, if 53% of Canadian households, Brett, would go sideways if one paycheck were missed.
Right.
And yet an accountant will tell you it's desirable in every Canadian household to have anywhere from 3 to 6 months of cash reserves on hand so that if any major event, the likes of which you were just describing a few minutes ago, comes along, it's not going to take you out financially. You can take the shock. So the advice is 3 to 6 months cash on standby at all times. There, good boy. The other side of the coin is we live in the most expensive part of the country, and most of us would be hooped if we missed one paycheck. That's a big circle to square.
It is. It is a difficult situation, and very often when you're inside the situation and you are that person who's living paycheck to paycheck, and you don't have the extra money to stash away and build yourself up some kind of reserve for the unexpected event, it is very difficult. But it is something that you need to actively, and I say this actively pursue, just for no other reason, for personal peace of mind.
And this from an expert. This man is a trustee in bankruptcy.
I'm talking myself out of business
here
as I'm saying this.
And I hope you're successful. I do, because you already have predicted 12,000 of us will go bankrupt in this. But if you can save a couple of us from that issue, then good on you. But it's true. If you can talk a couple of people out of not going bankrupt,
and I do actually,
in 2014, good for you.
I got to tell you, Stirling, actually, I and many other trustees, in fact, do that. In fact, I love it when the phone rings and someone calls me, and I can actually say to them right up front on the telephone, once I've discussed their personal financial situation, that A, you don't have to go bankrupt, and in fact, even B, I don't even think you should be thinking about a consumer proposal right now. Why don't you try a couple of these other options?
Okay.
And it's things often people have not even thought about. I know that everybody understands what the concept of the consolidation of debt is, trying to consolidate all your credit cards into one single repayment.
Right.
There are so many options. And in fact, it's the reason why people such as credit counselors and debt settlement arrangers exist as well. And, there are good ones and there are bad ones. I love it when the phone rings and someone calls me and I'm able to tell them, you know what, I actually think there's a way out here where you don't have to do what you thought you had to do, because they always, so often the phone rings and someone says to me, I think I'm going to have to go bankrupt.
Right.
And then I have to say to them, no, maybe you don't. Let's discuss this first.
Brett,
right?
What's the difference between, and you've just described a couple of these other occupations, what's the difference between a debt or credit counselor and a trustee?
Effectively, a trustee is the licensed, federally regulated professional who is allowed to, and the only licensed professional that is allowed to file a bankruptcy or file a consumer proposal.
Okay.
So and I say when I use us, we are trustees in bankruptcy throughout Canada are the only licensed people allowed to do a bankruptcy or proposal. Credit counselors perform a very important function, which is they can often give you advice that, let's put it this way, very often people find trustees in bankruptcy intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
They're scared of us because we are the guys who are going to make them bankrupt.
Right.
Just in the word, there it is, trustees in bankruptcy. Whereas credit counselors, they're less scary. The people you can go see, they will talk to you. They can give you advice on how to consolidate your debt, as an example.
Sure.
In many cases, they will even negotiate directly with the bank for you, try and reduce the rates of interest on your credit cards. Some of them even help you out in terms of negotiating mortgages. They have resources where potentially they know mortgage brokers. They know what kind of car, if you want to get yourself another car, what kind of car financiers exist out there. They perform a very important function, but there is a point in many cases where people reach where even a credit counselor or debt settlement arranger is never going to solve the problem for you.
Right.
And that's when invariably they call someone like me.
But a trustee is, in addition to providing the service of filing for bankruptcy or filing a consumer proposal, you are equally adept at passing along good financial information and advice.
I've spent quite a few years studying just so that I could put the letter CIRP, which is Chartered Insolvency Restructuring Professional, after my name. And a lot of that study did not just because I had to learn what insolvency law in Canada said, but also because I needed to understand the base underlying driving factors that push debt or credit in the system.
Right.
Yeah.
Our guest from Abakhan and Associates is Trustee Brett Luckin, who's not at all scary, despite the fact that he has a job that many people consider to be so. We're talking debt issues and the fact that there are solutions and there is hope, and there's lots more ahead. By the way, Abakhan and Associates is online at abakhan.com, and that is spelled ABAKHAN.com. Check it out while we take a quick timeout here on CISL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CISL 650.